Somebody media, right? There's Roger Price. Famous for many things. We won't go into all of them. But he's one of our new recruits for the Wolverine Pulpfest audiobook series. Radio Archives is doing numerous short stories to round out the entire Pulp magazines which remains audio taper. It's an almost new concept in audiobooks. Pulp magazines are on CD and downloadable. And as many of you know, I had the great good fortune last year to have my cover artist, Joe DeVito, say, when we were discussing, what are we going to do for Doc Savage's 80th anniversary in February, March 2013, Joe said to me in a phone conversation, he said, well, you know, I have the rights to sequels to King Kong. I said, oh, really? My immediate reaction was panic, because I knew this was too good not to do, but I also knew this was a big undertaking on a lot of levels, and I wasn't sure it was what I wanted to do with Doc, because I already planned out my 7 books of this contract. So well planned that I had 8 plots. So this would have, meant a 9th story. So after checking with the Condé Nast people who own the rights to Doc Savage, they said, yeah, go do it. We'll work it out in there. And we worked out a deal, and off I went. And in February this year, we released Skull Island with a wonderful Joe DeVito cover. And it's getting amazing reviews, much better reviews than I thought it would get, because I thought it was a risky book to do. We're stepping outside the normal Doc Savage thing. We've never done a Doc Savage crossover. We never even thought about seriously a Doc Savage crossover with Second Dreams. And it's gotten great reviews. A lot of you have come up and complimented me on it, but a lot of you have come up and bought the book and said, here, it gets great reviews. I want this. So this panel is dedicated to the fact that we have a Doc Savage meets King Kong book, an e-book, and even as we speak, they're editing a Skull Island audiobook for Radio Archives, and we kind of had hoped to have it here, at least a sample disc, but these take a lot of production, and it's a very long book, in the sense of it's a lot of chapters, and these things tend to be produced in chapters. So anyway, the purpose of this panel is for Roger to do a reading from Skull Island, and then we'll throw it open to questions. And hopefully answers. If we can guarantee you have questions, we can't guarantee that we'll have answers. If we don't have any questions.
If we don't have the answer, we'll make something up.
Yeah. Or we'll do sleight of hand or something. Anyway, so this is kind of, for me, it's kind of a relaxed panel. I'm just going to chatter. Roger's going to do this thing. Then Q&A. And eventually, that's how we do it. Before I start, does anybody have a comment or a request or whatever? Because we can go right into the reading. Since I can put the microphone down. That's my favorite part. Yes, Mike Chomko, you're giving away red tickets. You're up to something.
We have our door prize.
So we can do that right now.
Anyone? Yeah, let's do that. Does everyone have a ticket out there? One up. Right left. Who doesn't have a ticket? Okay. This is, okay, we've been giving away these all Pulpfest in the afternoon reading. Captain Hawkman and the Skyhook Pirates, donated by the author Charles F. Millhouse and Stormgate Publishing. 846-323.
One.
Second me?
I did ask you to come up for a ticket if you wanted a ticket. Okay. All right. And that's the winner. All right, thank you.
Try again next time.
Roger Price at Will Murray?
Yeah, we're back in business.
All right.
Well, anyway, Roger has a long career in running comic book shows in the Ohio area. Ohio being the state. You know how words come out of your mouth.
Mid-Ohio?
And you can tell us a bit about your audio background, since I'm not as knowledgeable about that. And then we can, I'll kick you into the reading. How's that?
All right. Yeah, briefly, I've been involved, I guess, in one level of announcing or broadcasting, radio, TV, live events for, about 40 years now, which is kind of amazing because I'm really only 35. But we've done everything from morning radio shows to announcing, being a ring announcer rather for professional wrestling and everything in between. And now I'm very happy to be a part of the Radio Archives family, as reading several really great short stories for their audiobook releases.
Okay. Well, Roger, are you up to starting?
We're going to give it a try.
All right, I'm going to turn this entirely over to you. Quite my ways, because having my own stuff read aloud is a little weird for me.
He says it's weird. No pressure on me reading the man's words and he's sitting right next to me. Oh, boy. Here we go. From the Wild Adventures of Doc Savage, this is Skull Island by Will Murray. Prologue. 3 pale seagulls circled the bald steel knob that was the summit of the Empire State Building, where hours before, a squadron of Navy Curtiss O2C-2 warplanes had buzzed and swooped through the clouds of burnt cordite. Now gulls ranged, emitting raucous cries, avid eyes gazing down at the red flecks of animal flesh that bespattered into skyscrapers' austere Art Deco battlements. Wheeling, one swooped down, its long beak gobbling up a raw morsel. Another attacked a gob of matter, carried it away triumphantly. Lunging and pecking, they cleaned the carrion debris of combat from every ledge and cranny, these ghostly buzzards of the metropolis. As morning continued its slow, majestic breaking, they peeled away, satiated, broad-winged, sun-burnished copper, never to return. In time, a warm rain began falling. What remained, red fluid and sticky specks of fur, began to run and drain away. Before the rain ceased, steel and granite had been washed off, cleansed of all trace of that which was already falling into legend. Far below, crowds clustered around the body of the vanquished. Men in blue, their copper coat buttons afire, were busy unreeling kegs of barbed wire to cordon off the corpse. Press flashbulbs popped and were discarded, shattering on the wet pavement. Shoving bodies pressed closer, toppling the police sawhorses. A police captain mounted a wooden keg. He lifted a megaphone to his face. "Back, you men! Back!" He might as well have been talking to a moving wall. "You reporters had your stories," the captain extorted. "Go home! The king is dead and he won't be rising again." A scribe called out, "Captain, what are you going to do with it?" "That's for smarter men than me to decide, boyo. What does the mayor say about this?" "Why don't you ask him?" shot back the captain. Another shouted, "What about the governor? Is he in charge?" "A bigger man than he is going to handle this. Don't you quote me either." The questions kept flying. Brickbats would have been easier to fend off. "Is the new president coming to New York?" demanded a reporter. "Ain't heard that," snapped the captain. "What about—" A shadow crossed the noon sky. A great aircraft, a trimotor with wings as bronze as a Chinese gong, overflew the skyscraper. It circled twice, then droned off in the direction of North Beach Airport. The police captain gave out a windy sigh of relief. "That's all," he snapped, jumping off the keg. "No more comments. Be off with yous." An hour later, a gunmetal gray roadster nosed its way through the congestion of packed humanity. There were no cars on Fifth Avenue, nor for many blocks around. Jostling pedestrians gave way reluctantly. The man behind the wheel showed unusual patience as he tooled his quiet machine toward the skyscraper entrance. Animated eyes swept the way before him. They were the color of golden flakes, ceaselessly swirling. Sunlight, touching his closed, combed hair, made individual hairs smolder like thin wires of bronze and copper. Busy bluecoats removed sawhorses to allow him to pass, replacing them swiftly to block all egress. When the sedan drew up to the entrance, the police captain rushed to open the door. "Thank heaven you're here," he greeted. The bronze-skinned individual who stepped out onto the running board seemed to unfold until he stood erect, a colossus of a man. He moved forward, his face a mass of metal. Steady eyes fell on the great corpse that lay still on the cracked pavement, whereupon they hardened into gold nuggets. Two mismatched men rushed out of the building entrance. One was a slim dandy who brandished a dark, elegant cane. The other, a red-haired human gorilla with a bullet head, whose long, dangling arms waved excitedly. "Ah!" cried the first man. "You missed the entire valley spectacle!" "Yeah," growled the second. "After the thing broke loose, it terrorized the city, then climbed to the top of the skyscraper. The Navy sent warplanes to knock him off." "They called the brute." The bronze giant waved their excited comments aside. "Calm," he said softly, sadly. "Well, you heard the reports." The bronze giant shook his head slowly. "I know this creature." The human gorilla's blocky jaw dropped open. "Blazes! You do?" "Long ago he saved my life," intoned the metallic man. "Ham Brooks and Monk Mayfair lost all power of speech. And I returned the favor in kind," said Doc Savage.
A little more taste of the book, but the prologue seems to be a good place to start. And it reminded me how that came about. We first discussed, Joe DeVito and I first discussed doing this book February of 2012, around the time of the 79th anniversary of Doc Savage. When we went to Condé Nast, it took only 2 days to get back an answer. Usually it takes 2-3 months, sometimes a lot longer. And when I noticed the calendar, we got our okay from Condé Nast on the 79th anniversary of the premiere of the King Kong film. I said, well, that's a good one. And once I had the okay from Condé Nast, I was, of course, working on The Infernal Buddha at that time and had planned to do Death's Dark Domain next, and did do Death's Dark Domain next. It's easy for me to write a Doc Savage, and I just go into the Lester Dent mode and do my thing. To write this, once we came up with a line of attack, and I can tell you more about that later, it became, well, how do I write this thing? I mean, it's set in 1920, approximately 1920, and, the Lester Dent writing style is a mixture of Dashiell Hammett and a couple other guys, and it's the 1930s flavor writing style. It wouldn't work for 1920. That style didn't exist. Now, not everybody would be, sensitive to that, but I was. I said, well, that's not the style in which to do this, as well as work out a plot that makes sense. And, it was, it's, as I say, it's easy for me to write a doc because I just plug into the whole engrossing concept. But to do this, it's like, I got to find a line of attack, a tone, a voice that works. And until I wrote the prologue, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I'm not sure how much of it I thought through. But one day in June, when we were far along in discussing the plot, because Joe had collaborated on a book called King of Skull Island a bunch of years before, which was going to be I wouldn't say our book was a sequel to it, it was kind of a prequel sequel, because that book sprawled along across a long time horizon. And I said at some point, I said, I gotta, in the middle of another book in front of me, I can't let this project be shoved into the future, and I'll deal with it, because it was making me nervous. It was creating some issues in terms of, I gotta solve the problem, the immediate problem, how do I write this thing? In other words, what tone fit? So one day I was talking to Joe, because we talked about a lot of lines of attack, and we abandoned most of them. We thought people would like Doc and Colin in the 30s, because that was their time period, but, Colin died. And you can't put Doc Savage into the Colin movie, you would disrespect the movie. Can't do a sequel to King Kong the movie, because Colin was dead. So it had to be a prequel. So I remember getting this idea of the three seagulls circling the Empire State Building after Kong had fallen, like vultures, birds of death, and they were the symbolic replacements for the warplanes that had shot Kong down. I described that to Joe. He liked it. He liked it a lot. And the feeling I got from that vision, that image in my head, was appropriately a kind of an emotionally mournful feeling. Because people love Doc Savage, but they revere King Kong. And one of the reasons they revere King Kong is we saw his life. Not so much the beginning, but the middle and the end. So people feel sad when he falls, whereas Doc never fell. So we love Doc, but we don't mourn him. So I had to bring a tone that was respectful, but also appropriate. And I came up with this sort of poetic, emotionally downbeat prologue. So when I described that to Joe, he liked it. So I sat down last June and did what was, I think, a 3 or 4 page epilogue, just to set the stage, to test, the approach, the tonal approach, really. And that's how I wrote it. And the way I wrote it is pretty much how it ended up being published. I tweaked a couple little bits here and there. I might have changed the planes a little bit. And I sent it to Joe. He loved it. And once I knew Joe liked it, he thought that was the right tone. I said, okay, I have a line of attack on this book. And I didn't come back to it until September, October after we got this the main out. And that was when I broke the ice on this book and unlocked the key. People have said that prologue is one of the best things I've ever written. It didn't feel like writing to me so much as painting a tone poem or a mood, which I guess is a good writing. What do you think?
I think it's fantastic. I really do. I mean, it really sets the stage for what's to come within the book. It gives you I think, a really sweeping overview of what the streets of New York City must have looked like at that moment.
Well, I was happy with that, and we proceeded later in the year. I think the thing about this book that most sticks in my mind is when I started writing it, and normally in the other docs, I either write a typical Lester Dent length chapter, which is about 10, 11 manuscript pages, or I do something a little longer, 15. I started writing the real chapters last October. They came out very short. And I thought, well, I wanted to set the New York stage as quickly as possible to get into the flashback, into the main story. He said that was fine. Well, I started telling the main story. The chapters are very short, unusually short. And it was like thin slices of chapters. This isn't how I was supposed to write this book. But it got us out of New York, out of 1933 very fast. And it got us into San Francisco, where Doc meets his father, to go on this mysterious trip to the South Seas to find the missing grandfather, Stonewall Savage. And no matter what I did, the chapters were very short. I said, well, this is the way the book is coming out. I'm just going to go with it. I just didn't feel in control of it. And that's the strange thing about writing sometimes. When you start writing something, you think you do it this way, but it comes out in a way that, at least for me, is guided by some, higher, sensitivity or whatever. I can't explain it, not logically. And so, after a while, I just said, okay, the chapters are going to be more or less short, some shorter, some longer. And if this is the way the book is coming out, I don't have time to stop and rethink about this. We had to get this out in February. I started working on October. I remember a couple of days when I was turning out large amount of chapters, just blasting out very fast, and spelling words like crazy, but just flowing. I mean, one day, I think I wrote 15 chapters. It was just bam, bam, bam. And every time I shut down the computer lights, I said, I hope I just wrote some good stuff, because if I didn't, I just wasted it. But, in the rewrite, you can make things work that may not felt like they did. Do we want to hear more of this book, or should I ramble on? More. Okay, Roger. Roger Price is going to pick up where he left off. Give us whatever you feel like. You don't have to do the whole chapter. Skip around if you want. There's some dull parts, just skip over.
Now, I'm going to read the exciting stuff and let them read the dull parts when they buy your book. How's it? All right, Chapter 1. Clark Savage, Jr., the scientist and adventurer who was rapidly becoming a legend in the world as Doc Savage, dropped the telephone receiver into its bronze prong with a clank. That was the mayor, he told Monk and Ham. He has requested that we undertake the problem of removing the body.
Good thing it's Sunday,
grunted Monk, formerly Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Blodgett Mayfair.
The office buildings are deserted, so it'll be a snap to keep the streets clear.
Ham, he had been Brigadier General Theodore Marley Brooks during the World War, looked at his platinum wristwatch and remarked, "Many should be here before long." Monk nodded.
Between you and Rennie, Doc, we'll get this problem fixed up quick.
Doc Savage said nothing. His golden eyes roved about the reception room of this topmost floor of the Empire State Building. He'd only recently taken up residence here. The suite of rooms had belonged to his father, Clark Savage Sr., whose recent passing remained fresh in their minds. A model of a two-masted schooner stood on a pedestal as a reminder of the father's long career roving the world, doing good, and accomplishing wonders. Now, it was the son's turn to take up the family business, if business it could be called. Doc's bronze hand moved along the ornate top of the great oriental table that served as a desk. Inlays of ivory and rare woods had been cunningly set into the polished surface. In reality, some of these were electrical buttons which triggered hidden mechanisms. You all knew that my father was an explorer in his way, Doc said quietly.
Sure,
said Monk.
he was a great man.
Greater than any of us knew. He did much of his work quietly and without fanfare. He left his mark from New York to Chongqing. He was a noted philanthropist, said Ham, eyeing the long, slim barrel of his dark cane. He made and lost many fortunes, agreed Doc. But some of the greatest treasures he uncovered, my father chose not to exploit. Doc Savage's eyes grew reflective. Getting up from his chair, the bronze giant went to a huge safe in one corner. It would have done credit to a bank. Giving the dial a preliminary spin, he worked the combination and threw the great steel door wide. From a cubbyhole, Doc removed a teak box. He set this on the great inlaid table. It was unlocked. He lifted the ornate lid. From within, he pulled a yellowed square of parchment, very aged, and showing signs of having been waterlogged. This is the only proof my father brought back from the island, Doc said.
What island?
Wondered Monk. Without answering, the bronze man set silver paperweights on each corner of the parchment. What is it? Asked Ham, dark eyes sharpening.
Looks like a map,
grunted Monk. A kind of map, said Doc. But it came into my father's possession in a damaged state. See the blurry area? Squid ink writing, obliterated. The only part that was unaffected was a landmark drawn in a different ink, a vegetable preparation that resisted salt water. Monk and Ham crowded closer. On the parchment, drawn in a reddish-brown ink that suggested dried blood, was a rough outline of a brooding death's head set atop a promontory.
A skull for sure,
said Monk. A mountain peak in the shape of a skull, said Doc Savage. That was all my father had to go on. He called it Death's Head. But that was not its true name. What was? Inquired Ham. And to find out more, you're going to have to read the book.
Thank you, Ron. That was really good. Listening to that, I have to be honest, I feel very detached from this book. I wrote it rapidly and, under pressure and, we had to get it out in the deadline. And so it was all about getting it done as opposed to dwelling on it. But I always write a very lean first draft and then build the scenes or build a description afterwards. I tell the story first and then we'll put it into the frosting and gingerbread and whatever goes into it. And one of the things that I noticed when I was working on the second or third pass is every time we saw Skull Island, it was just there. And I realized it needed to be more than just there. It's so emblematic. It's such a simple idea, but also so powerful visually, that in one revision I kept going back and adding animation to Skull Island, clouds and shadows across its brow, and light in the hollow eye sockets, and tried to make it come alive through weather and light effects. In fact, I art direct the covers. When Joe and I did the cover, of course the hardcover's a wraparound. I don't have a hardcover with me. I sold out today. When we came up with this wonderful picture, we had the great good fortune to inherit from Jim Lama all the negatives, the surviving negatives for the photo shoots of Steve Holland as Doc Savage, many of which were used, but several of which weren't. And we came across this one. There were two versions. The other arm is a little more elevated. And we looked at it and said, what a great iconic image, but what the hell would it go with, But when King Kong project came up, after we looked at the photos and, narrowed it down to a handful, I said, you know what? That would be a great pose for what it's meant to be a monumental book for an iconic character. So that's how this cover came to be. But my point is, when we discussed other elements of the cover, we obviously wanted Skull Island on the cover because the book's called Skull Island. It wouldn't do just to have Kong. Our original concept for the cover with another photo was simply to have Doc up in a tree, sort of full body profile. He's looking sort of around behind him. There's Kong's face coming through the foliage. In the background, you see Skull Mountain behind the trees as a smaller image. We discarded that when we came up with this one. Well, I said to Joe, why don't you, when you paint Skull Island, put fires in the eye sockets? Joe's a purist, just designer, and he said, I don't know about that. I mean, there was nothing like that in the movie. And I said, you can always paint it out. It doesn't work. You can always paint it out. So he painted it in. This is before I got going on the book. I just said, I can make it work in the book. I'll put them in there. Once he painted, he said, oh, that's really good. So we kept it in, and I put it in as an element in the book that these Dayak headhunters who are on Skull Island are trying to keep Kong from getting back to his lair where he's safe, so they set fires in the eye sockets of Skull Mountain so he can't get back in. And that's why there were fires. And I thought that was a nice touch. And he thought it was a nice touch. So making Skull Island, specifically Skull Mountain, a character, because it's Kong's lair. We get inside, we're outside, we see it from a distance, we see it close up. Making that a character, I think, helped the book a lot because it almost seemed like it was alive when you painted the atmospherics, the changing weather patterns, the fire in the eyes, and going on, perhaps. But I thought that was one of the things I most enjoyed about polishing this book is taking stuff in the first draft was just there and bringing it to life. You want to open up to questions now?
Good idea. Any questions for Will? Yes.
I know that you're an expert on Doc Savage, but how did you become an expert on King Kong?
Well, I don't think I was an expert on King Kong. I think what happened was, 10 or so years ago, 20 years ago, after my first run of Doc Savages, Joe DeVito and I had a dinner in a restaurant in the Empire State Building. We had a project called King of Skull Island, and I was the first writer. He approached on that, and we sort of mapped out a strategy for the book. And I wasn't an expert on Kong then, but he thought I could write the story. Well, over a period of a year or so, we worked on it, but it didn't gel. Joe had a vision that was different from my vision, so he went in a different direction with different writers. And I never worked on that book other than, in a preliminary sense. So when he came back to me and said, I can sequel my book, and we could put Doc Savage in the sequel, it wasn't so much about me being an expert on Kong. I mean, let's face it, if we're going to be purists, all we would do is see the King Kong movie, read the original novelization, and get the facts right. And Joe was the expert. King Kong's his passion. So he was my collaborator in the sense that when we got to Skull Island and we got to the King Kong elements of it, that's where I needed him to make sure I was on track. Not only with the original movie, but with the version of Skull Island that's in his book. And, I had a copy of the book for a long time. I never read it, I started reading it. But I found the writing style was throwing me a little, because when I read things, I tend to absorb the style that can affect the writing I do. So I stopped reading it, and I sort of skimmed it. And I said to Joe, you have to backstop me. I'm going to write the scenes based on what I understand, is your intention, your view of Skull Island. And you're going to help me be, on target. So Joe is the expert on Kong. I'm the expert on Doc. So that was, and I'm glad you brought that up because, Joe wasn't just, I have the rights to Kong and I can paint the cover. Joe was a true collaborator. I mean, it's my plot, but we worked out the line of attack together. And when I was writing it, I was writing it solo pretty much until we got to Skull Island, because Joe isn't knowledgeable of Doc Savage or his father, or even any grandfather I might have been. So I didn't need him until we got to Skull Island. And when we got to Skull Island, I needed him a lot. And he had a lot of good ideas, and and we bounced things off each other. And, I usually don't collaborate that way, but it was necessary and it was useful, and it worked really, really well. Because one of the problems I had with this book is it's meant to be kind of a sequel. It's not a sequel to the movies, it's a sequel to the novelization of the movie from 1932, which has differences, legally, contractually. Joe's rights come off of the Marion C. Cooper estate and the novelization of the movie that came out actually before the movie. And we had a total line in that sense. We had to reflect the novelization and, to a lesser degree, Joe's Kong, King of Skull Island book. So I needed Joe to keep me completely focused on what we could use and what we couldn't use that was appropriate for this. It worked out really, really well. Now, behind you, someone had a question.
Yes, over here in the audience.
Yes. First, Mr. Price, congratulations. You have succeeded in giving Nails on a Blackboard a voice.
Thank you. I think.
Well, that was pretty much how Monk was described.
Yeah, squeaky voice.
And second, Mr. Murray, it occurs to me that working hastily and under pressure, down to having to adjust your story to fit the cover art, is in and of itself very much in the venerable Pulp tradition.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just that in these docs, I have the luxury to take it 2, 3, 4 months to write it instead of the 30 days last we can't have it. But yeah, many writers will tell you sometimes they do their best work when they just have to sit down and just get it done and can't fool around with it, can't overthink it. And that, I think, worked here, although I didn't always enjoy the process. It was a little scary because I was flying. I wrote this book without a real plot. I came up with some sketchy ideas. I knew we were going to Skull Island. I improvised an awful lot. And when you're working on a plot, you have to be really good at plotting because it still has to read like a plotted book. It has to have a beginning, middle, and things have to be paced appropriately. So, fortunately, I have that internal mechanism, so that even working with a plot, I ended up with a story that flowed appropriately. Because this is meant to be a literary story more than a pulp story, although it's a pulp story in the way Uri Burroughs wrote pulp. It's 1920s pulp, as opposed to 1930s pulp, which is a very different approach to pulp. But you're right. If you put your blinders on and just get the work done, sometimes that means you don't put any junk in a book that you might think, oh, this is good junk. I want to put this good junk in this book. And apparently there's no junk in the book. People really like this. They like it better than my other docs, which I didn't expect. I expected people to like Doc Meeting Kong because it's such a wonderful idea and people have talked about it for years. I didn't know it was going to go over on the level it is because I did step outside of the whole typical Doc Savage, story, which I think is what people mostly want. But I'm hearing from people, do more crazy stuff like this. Well, we'll see. Another question.
Did you show him learning lessons and making him the man he is in the Pulp novels?
Say that again?
Did you show him learning life lessons which shaped him into the Doctor?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's another aspect. I knew to write this book, I didn't want it to read like fan fiction, throwing Doc against King Kong. One of the technical problems is, even though the size of King Kong is negotiable in the movie, he shoots up from like maybe 20 feet to 50 feet between scenes, if you actually scale him right. We came up with a size of King Kong that's not on the top of my head, but I think it's approaching 20 feet, that we felt was large enough but not ridiculously large. But, as Joe and I discussed, we couldn't just throw Doc onto Skull Island and have a big fight fest because the characters are scaled wrong for combat. This can't be Doc versus King Kong. It would make no sense. Maybe Doc in the 1930s with all his equipment could fight King Kong, but in this book he would have to relate to King Kong on a different level. That's the literary part of it, the non-pulp approach. So in the sense of how do we do this book intelligently, it was we can't go to Skull Island too fast, because then what do? We can't have Doc and Kong chasing each other through the jungle for 5 chapters, 10 chapters, 20 chapters. It wouldn't be an interesting story. Hence, I came up with the idea of Doc and his father searching for Doc's grandfather, Skull Savage, who turns out to be marooned on Skull Island. And the layering in the first third of the book before we get to Skull Island is Doc's just come back from World War I. He loved it. Everybody else, horrors of war. Doc and his men, hey, this is a blast. How do you keep doing this stuff? And Doc is, has killed in the war. So we have the violent Doc of the first few Doc Pulp stories before he gets his apparently medical degree and has to take the oath of causing no harm. So in approaching the character side of Doc Savage, he's young, he's overconfident, his training has been suspended by the war. His father was very concerned that his son may decide to become a mercenary and abandon his training, because Doc turns out to have been a very successful soldier. So one of the things I had is a thread in the book that Doc wants to perfect the Tommy gun, which is brand new, so new it didn't get fielded in the war when it was built as a trench clearer. And the other thing is Doc has to refine himself. Now he's been through the war. So we have a lot of foreshadowing of the Doc Savage of the Pulps. I won't get into a lot of it because some of it develops in the course of the book. But there's a lot of conflict between Doc and his father, which is necessary for a book like this. Some people have said, oh, I don't see Doc and his father relating to each other this antagonistically. But, to me, with my research into the kind of men, the generations that Doc and his father belonged to, it would have been like this. It wouldn't be warm and fuzzy. They didn't think about that for the most part. So we have Doc's father giving lip service to, yeah, you're a free man now. You've been through a war. You helped win a war. You can do what you want. You don't have to go back to the training. But we need to find your grandfather. But the whole thing is about getting Doc back into the groove of being Doc Savage. and not becoming some kind of resident. So we see a lot of foreshadowing, a lot of origins, and we see Doc tested in ways that his overconfidence isn't up to. Doc is a great believer in the Tommy gun, in the .45 automatic. They were both new technology. He's also a great believer in the airplane and the submarine, also new technology. His father is a sailing ship man. His grandfather was a clipper ship captain, because those were the big technologies of their time. You got to remember, in the 1920s, airplane flight was relatively new. We didn't have transatlantic flight. In fact, one of the things that makes this book different from a typical Doc Savage novel is he has no tools, no weapons. He doesn't have his planes. The only way to get to Skull Island is by boat. You would have to get there by boat. So it makes for a different book than a Doc could hop into an aircraft and fly off to the Indian Ocean. The technology can exist when you do that. Maybe in the second one, you even get one of those. So yeah, this has been called the kind of new origin of Doc Savage, in the sense that we see this transition from war to peace, and the beginning of the path to being the adult Doc Savage. Another question?
Of course, the new Doc Savage books you've been writing get a lot of attention from the Pulp community. Have you seen the Skull Island book reaching out into new areas and getting attention outside the Pulp community? I know you got some coverage in Famous Monsters of Filmland, but have you seen new markets?
Yeah, we got a review in New York, review of books. It was very favorable. And I can tell you, obviously one of the strategies here was to bring attention to this new series using King Kong. It was just serendipitously that my cover artist, of all people, had the rights. I mean, I would never have gone after the rights because I had plenty of dent plots I wanted to do. I was a little reluctant to delay or even sacrifice a dent plot to do this book. But to answer your question, these are print on demand, so I can track the sales. It's got 35 reviews on Amazon now, whereas, I think the oldest book I have is 2 years old. That's only probably got 20. So we're getting a lot of reviews, much more than the other docs. But if I remember right, between the ebooks and the soft covers, which are the most active sales, I think this is outselling all the other docs on a 5 or 6 times basis. So it's selling much, much better. Obviously that's Kong, but it's also the word of mouth. It's also the stunt of it, Doc and Kong, it's authorized. And so in that sense, yeah, we are finding new readers, and presumably, hopefully, those people will be picking up my other docs. So for the strategy we had in mind, yes, this has worked. I think we can sell better, but you can always sell better. You had a question.
Yeah, the Doc of Skull Island is closer in age to the Escape from Loki guy.
He'd be like a year or so later.
Would that use of that book have any bearing on the new division Doc?
Well, I read Escape from Loki when it was published, and I haven't read it since, and there wasn't time to reread it, and I didn't want to be influenced by the Farmer writing style, because I'm kind of a literary chameleon. If I read something, it will affect my writing. So I made a conscious decision, since that book and this book are outside the series, they're individual writers' interpretations of Doc. I take the attitude that this is, Joe used to call it an Elseworlds kind of book. If you like it, it's part of the series. If you didn't like it, it's an alternate reality. We wanted people to be comfortable with it in the sense that, I don't really know what Doc would have been like at age 20, any more than Farmer at age 18. We have to bring our best, attention to it, our best interpretation. So I didn't reread it. I didn't really want to reread it. I didn't really want to plug into it because this is the sequel to that book, except chronologically. You accept Escape from Loki, and it's a controversial book. Not everybody who's a Doc fan, took to it. If you accept that, then this is the next book in the adventure in his life. You don't have to worry about it. So I didn't tie it directly. And in fact, I went out of my way not to connect with it. But people said, well, it's congruent with some of the things in Escape from Loki, which is fine. There's no reason why it shouldn't be congruent. But, I saw that as Farmer's take, and this is my take based on young Doc Savage. It's just different from Lester Dent's take, so I just felt it wasn't useful to try to connect the two, because it wasn't a true sequel to Escape from Loki. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm giving long answers today for some reason.
I know I already had a question, but I'm really curious, is there any chance that this would be a movie?
People keep saying that. They're planning a Doc Savage movie. I suppose if they do a couple of three and they're looking for some extra kick on a third or fourth Doc movie, they might be willing to look at that. The problem with this book is I think it could make an interesting movie, but it would have to be, rethought. Because, in a typical Hollywood movie, you need a female character and a romance or something, sexual tension. The only female in this book is elderly, and there's no romance. There's, and it's very limited cast. Doc is young, and there's two older guys, grandfather and father. So it's not the sexiest movie or most Hollywood story you could bring to the screen, but people said it would make a great movie. It would have to be radically compressed and rethought to make that work. Yes, you.
Send a copy of the book to Peter Jackson.
Well,
He did King Kong and a fairly creditable job on the ape at least.
yeah, he did. But the Doc Savage rights are with another company, so we can't play that game because Peter Jackson has no rights to Doc Savage. That's tied up right now. Shane Black is scripting a Doc Savage movie for Sony Columbia. So at the moment, that would be bad form. Maybe, if the current Doc Savage movie cycle comes and goes, and the rights are wide open, because it's a timeless story, yeah, maybe someday. But, I didn't write this book for it to become a movie, because I knew there was already a movie project, and I don't want to interfere with that. That's Condé Nast, the copyright owner and trademark owner. That's their dance. My dance is the books. Yes, go ahead.
With regard to the angle of approach and the difficulty of reconciling more leisurely 1920s with slam bang 1930s prose.
Yeah,
I was listening for the Dentian opening hook in the opening paragraph, and I have to say you succeeded in working one into a more leisurely 1920s style paragraph with the line about the flesh on the spires.
Right. I don't think I was thinking of the narrative hook consciously, but I write these books without necessarily doing a lot of thinking about them. They kind of just flow out of me. So I remember thinking, what's my approach? And whenever I write about another person's character, and here I'm referring to Colin, not Doc Savage, I try to read the most original source material, whether it's Sherlock Holmes or The Spider or Doc Savage, and key into the style, the sensibility. And so with Kong, since we don't have much prose, we have the original novelization, which is not super well written, but it was helpful to me. My approach was more almost spiritual, because we start with the death. The death of a beloved character, so it had to have an appropriately reverential tone without being mawkish or maudlin. So, in the sense, it's like it's not that I got away from Lester Dent, it's that I noticed I wasn't doing Lester Dent's usual stuff. In fact, when I did one of the polishes, I added the line blazes to Monk's speech in the prologue, because the last page of the prologue spilled over 3 words, and I needed it to have another line or so, so I added a couple things. I was leaving out all the Dent stuff that was kind of 30s goofy, like, blazes and stuff like that. And I put it in because it was harmless. But I remember at one point thinking, what would my template be? And all I could think was Edgar Rice Burroughs. It's the right time period, the right kind of feel. It's more literary than Lester Dent. And I almost sat down and read some Burroughs to sort of key into that. They said, no, I don't want this to read explicitly like an Edgar Rice Burroughs Doc meets Tarzan book. But that would be my model. And I remember as I was writing it some little Burroughs things. I haven't read Burroughs in a number of years. I reread a book about maybe 5 years ago. So I'm not up on Burroughs the way I used to be, but I noticed some Burroughs stylistics and things creeping in. So that kind of came into it. So Edgar Rice Burroughs would be, and maybe Talbot Mundy to a lesser degree would be my models for this. But even then, I was trying to write it for a modern audience, so it was kind of a distillation of a 1920s pulp story style. You know, I wasn't letting anything get in the way of just telling the story. But things were popping in my head that were, you know, that flashed me back to Burroughs and Talbot Mundy, and that informed the book to some degree. Another question, anybody? It's okay if you don't have questions. Yes,
Did you consider the title Doc Econ?
No, I didn't. We thought about doing other titles, you know, Skull Island. Joe didn't like Skull Island that much because he'd done King of Skull Island. But Skull Island sounds like a Doc Savage title, you know. It fits the series. But, you know, I did play with a couple. That was my first and last choice. But I played with a couple other titles, Quest of Kong, which sounds like Doc, but I didn't think that was that good. I think maybe The Secret of Skull Island, but that was too long. Oh, at one point we were calling it simply Kong. Just Kong. Because we wanted to make sure people didn't think this was Doc versus some imitation or fake version of King Kong. So I was going to, at one point, it was going to be Kong with an exclamation point. And, you know, we played with that, but it kept going back to Skull Island. It was always my intention for it to be Skull Island, but Joe wanted something different, and we always ended up back at Skull Island, and we just finally went with it because it just made sense with the cover and the story and all that stuff.
And the fiery eye.
It's actually harder to title a book like this in terms of being creative because you really have to be more descriptive, you know, and you want it to sound like a Pulp Doc Savage title where you can. Another question? No more questions. Well, I still have copies for sale, not too many of the soft cover at my table in the room. I have free flyers for Radio Archives products, including a giveaway. Free download for Strange Detective Mysteries. If anybody wants a flyer, come up and get it. And I think this is our last Doc Savage audiobook for sale. We sold all the other ones out. That was hard to know how many of them. Yes.
Can you tell us, Will, what's coming next in terms of
Sure.
this year and the next Doc Savage books?
The next Doc Savage, which we're shooting for August, September, is called The Miracle Menace. I may be able to show you a cover if I have. Yes. It's a wraparound cover like the hardcover of King Kong. Only this was originally going to be our 80th anniversary book. It's called The Miracle Menace. It takes place in La Plata, Missouri, Lester Dent's hometown. It starts in La Plata. And I don't even want to describe the plot, because if I start describing the plot, it's not going to make sense. There's a lot of unusual elements that come together in an unusual way. This was going to be, in fact, when I was talking to Joe, I was saying, this is my idea for the 80th anniversary, The Miracle Menace, set in La Plata, Lester Dent's hometown. We need a cover, another cover idea, and that's when Joe came up with Skull Island. And this is meant to be more of a poster cover. It's Doc, Monk, and him in front of the Hidalgo warehouse with a dirigible floating above them, and Empire State Building, Chrysler Building in the background. I don't know how well you can see this. You can probably look at it if you want. You can put it in the track of that. But we took a classic poster Doc Savage. We put one model of the machine pistol in his hand. We gave Monk a different model of the machine pistol so you could see for the first time the two versions. Ham's got his cane. That photo was off the back covers of the original painted Docs. The model was Len Neely, the art director of the Phantom books, who came up with the Doc Savage Twitter feed and the original Doc Savage flag logo, which is famous to this day. He died recently, unfortunately. And it's Doc, Monk, and him in front of the Hidalgo warehouse. And I see the setting and rising sun, I'm not sure. It's a fabulous cover. Maybe we can do it in the poster as a poster if we have permission. But we wanted an 80th anniversary book cover that was just classic. Not necessarily tied into the story. It stands alone.
What year? When does that take place?
October 1937. Yeah, specifically October 1937 because the action leads up to Columbus Day. It was the first national Columbus Day in American history. Previously, it had been celebrated region, and it's set approaching Columbus Day and approaching Halloween for very specific reasons. So it's kind of a Halloween book. There's kind of a haunted house. There's kind of some strange characters running around, people trying to be things that they might not be. Again, if I describe it, it could sound really strange. It's maybe the wildest docs in terms of the number of unusual elements and the way we stretch the series in new directions. And it might have a returning villain.
Sounds like you had some fun with it.
I had a lot of fun with it. Well, Lester Dent had started this book. So this is another Lester Dent special. He gave me a good start, and I think we did a good job. But, you guys will be the judge of that. Because, no matter how good it is, everybody's going to say, well, it's no Skull Island. Because, I don't know if I can do another one like this again. We may have placed a ceiling over my head in terms of what we can get away with and how well we can exceed ourselves. But I'm happy to have done this, and I'm happy to go back to a normal Doc Savage for a change. Because that's what I like to do most, but, your basic Lester Dent flavor Doc Savage. Yes?
Is the cast in this, is it just going to be Monk and Ham, or are we going to see John?
No, everybody's in this.
Oh, they are?
Everybody except Pat. Couldn't get Pat into this one, she didn't really fit. What's good about this is everybody has something to do that's specific to their skills or specific to their personality. Everybody's in it, but the characters separate here and there and get separated, and they have to fend for themselves. And so Long Tom has a key part. Ham and Habeas. Habeas has a critical part in this story. He plays a bigger role than normal. It's a useful role for a meaningful role, and not just where Habeas is along the right. Because I'm not a big fan of the pets. I tend to leave the monkey out, but if I can use Habeas intelligently, I will. Ham does, Ham has some interesting things go on. He has some problem with the sword change. He does a little legal work near the end. Johnny gets his own little dance in this book that's very special to Johnny. And so everybody's in it, but they're not just in it to be in it. They have action, they have scenes of themselves, and most of the action has to do with who they are or what they do. So they're used in a useful way. And so it was fun. Everybody's involved in this one. And I would have put Pat in if I could, but she didn't really fit. She just would have been just along for the ride. One of my next books may or may not be the next one, Python Isle. It's a big Pat Savage book. We haven't done any with her since Desert Demon, anything significant. So Pat is going to be back with Adventure. So but I'm very happy because for the 80th anniversary, I wanted everybody on board and starting this stuff and being their familiar selves. Another question? What do we got for time?
We're pretty much now.
All right, then we're on the money. I don't see the people coming in to replace us, but they'll be back. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for supporting us. The Western Pulps might be very, very interesting to some of you because it's more about the Pulps than the Westerns. So, thanks for coming by. Thank you, Roger, for doing a great reading.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate it very much. And don't forget, there is an audiobook version of Skull Island in production, and it does, if I'm not mistaken, feature the incredible vocal talents of Michael McConaughey.
Michael McConaughey's done most of our audiobooks. He's doing that one, and apparently get a blast doing it. Thank you again.
Come on upstairs and see us. Thank you.